And Monty KERR is going to be talking to us about that. Monty has an amazing background. He's a serial gaming guy, having worked at Big Six Games, Red 5 Games, Knockout Games, and Glass Eye Entertainment. You don't have a glass eye, do you? Oh, you do? Okay. He was also at High Five in charge of monetization and advertising, and he's currently one of the co-founder and product development manager at Play Studios. And Play Studios has the My Vegas game on Facebook and is soon to be launching it on a mobile platform. The game is been developed in concert with MGM. It's an amazing game. It's probably one of the best games out there that also takes advantage of all the incentives that casinos offer to their customers, and it's really worth looking at the game to see what they've done. I think there's a lot of people out there that are very jealous of this game and what these guys have created. But like anything, creating a really good game sort of opens you up to sort of the bad things that happen on the internet, such as fraud, and Monty is going to talk to us today about that. And believe it or not, in some instances, bad fraud can be good. So I'll let Monty take it away.
Can you guys hear me? Is this mic picking up? Great. So this conversation works better as a dialogue. So everybody here, I'm assuming there's a decent number of developers who are making casino games in the audience. Every one of you has completely different fraud problems. So and as we talk about poker and bingo and casino and people with rewards, and it's all, you're going to find that you have a very different set of problems. And if I'm not addressing something that's concerning to you, as I move through it, raise your hand and I'll talk to you. It's if you know me, this is something that if we have drinks or a party here, we talk about this all the time, because like I said, I've got 20 minutes to radically change your deep-rooted opinions about fraud, and that doesn't really happen when you just look at slides and listen to me. You actually have to engage yourself. So, and I promise you that every one of you has, and probably can't even identify why you have such strong feelings about fraud, but I've encountered people who are angry at the players who commit fraud. I've encountered people who, try to ignore it and don't pay attention to it. But and I have the opinion that if you don't think you have a problem with fraud, you're in denial. If you think that fraud's not a problem that is hurting you, then that's a problem. But if you think fraud is terrible and evil, terrible people, you don't have an understanding of fraud. And if you don't think that there's benefits of fraud, then you haven't talked to me about it. So I call this maximizing fraud in online games. And I wrote a description, I'll read it to you. The goal of the discussion is to provide useful tools for distinguishing good fraud from bad, to highlight the benefits of fraud in social games, and leave you with a realistic view of risk management in an industry where the principal product is pixels. I think that we all have to really recognize what we're selling out there, and for most of us, we're selling pixels. So if you look at the actual cost of mining those pixels versus the fraud that's created, it gives you kind of a realistic opinion. I'm going to talk briefly about me. I've been making video games for about 2 decades. I've been building casino games for 15 years. I consider myself a game designer, but I focus really heavily on engagement monetization. I've built casino games for every market that there is. I started with real money casino games in 1998. During that time, from 2000 to 2006, my software did about $9 billion in microtransactions in real money, and about 35 million players went through it. But I built for retail. I did bicycle casino games. I did Microsoft casino products. I've done freemium space through Wild Tangent and Real Networks. I've done early mobile and Brew and J2ME. I've done skill gaming space, and we were really early web, and we've done a ton of social stuff. Personally, I've designed more than 100 casino games, so I know casino games pretty well, and have done all of them. So the next thing I want to talk about is our company. I'll talk really briefly about it. 2 years ago, we founded Play Studios, and he talked about, George talked a little bit about My Vegas, but I'll give you a little bit of details about it. We've been in the market for about 12 months. We've acquired about 3.5 million players. The game's really engaging. As you can see, we've got 1.5 million people fanned. We've got 250,000 players a day, about 800,000 players a month on Facebook. They play about 90 minutes a day. Besides the quality of the games, we've got these MGM brands, and we've invested in a rewards program that allows you to earn real-world rewards while you play the games. And that's show tickets, fine dining, room upgrades, hotel stays, attraction tickets, and that's all free to play. You can earn these just by playing for a relatively short period of time. Since we've launched the product, we've had 500,000 people eligible for a reward. They've earned enough loyalty points to play the game. We've sent 50,000 people to Las Vegas on trips, and that's led to some pretty interesting engagement numbers. Our DAU-MAU ratio hovers around 33-35%, and our day 1 retention and day 7 retentions are really strong. When we're talking one-on-one, I'll tell you that's because we have a brilliant team and I'm a great product owner, but really these real rewards have a very effective impact on the product. So let's talk briefly about what fraud is. And if you remember, my goal is to kind of challenge your deep-rooted opinions about fraud. So let's talk about defining it. Because I have a real-world reward program, I have to deal with things like automated play and duplicate accounts because that sends bad customers to my reward partners. But you may have different problems. Collusion may be a big problem for you, and there's tons of them. So let's talk about these in particular. Automated play is people using macro programs or scripters to play the game. Collusion is something I want to talk about really briefly, but it's worth talking about. And I don't know if you know what collusion is. It's basically players colluding together to take advantage of your system. This is most common in poker, but it appears anywhere that players can trade or move value between their accounts. That means that it even exists in pari-mutuel gaming, where people pool their money together and the house takes a vig or a cut and the rest of it's distributed according to the rules of your game. But it exists even in those. There's 3 major forms of collusion that you'll probably encounter. Duplicate accounts are the ones that are most common. That's players that are taking advantage of your collecting mechanism, harvesting chips or whatever from your game, your daily bonus or whatever it is. And then they'll create multiple accounts. The primary account they'll play through that money. Whenever they run out, they sit down with their own accounts and they lose intentionally to themselves, moving that value from one account to the other. That's by far the most common. But there's also friendly fraud, which we call twinking in the MMO space, which is me and my friends all sit together and they take advantage of this gifting mechanism and send me value. And then the last one is the secondary market, and that's the real fraud. That's the stuff that you imagine when you think about fraud, which is guys who are taking advantage of the system and then selling those chips on the secondary market on eBay for money. That's what we're all afraid of, but it's really not that common. We also deal with duplicate accounts, which I talked about briefly, and client hacks. Nick talked about that in the last talk about making a decision between making your game client server based or making your game really optimistic on the client. In the casino space, I can't urge you enough to go with a dumb client and make it as literally dumb as possible. Our games, the client knows no rules. They don't know how you level up. They don't know how you bet. They don't know the rules of the game. They don't know anything about the game at all. And that has reduced our fraud dramatically. And I learned this in the old days when I was doing real money gaming. From 2000 to 2003, we were the most attacked site on the internet because there was real money behind our firewalls, right? And it was terrible. So Golden Palace is our principal. We licensed about 72 different online casinos, but the one that was just being brutalized was Golden Palace. So if you take real money, or if the stuff, if you take payment of any form, friendly fraud is something that you're going to have to deal with. And friendly fraud is the most difficult type of fraud to find. That's people who legitimately made a purchase and then decided they didn't want it, right? And they may say they may have given access to their son or their daughter who made a purchase, but these look exactly like real players, and you're not going to find them. So, and they often lead to refunds and chargebacks. I'm assuming most of you guys are on a platform like Facebook or Google or Apple where they handle most of this stuff for you, and if you've been doing this for a while, you've noticed that over the years the environment's changed. Refunds in particular is where the customer goes to the platform and says, hey, I'm unhappy with my purchase, I want my money back, and often the platform will just give it to them. Facebook had a policy of no contest. You want your money back, you got it. And chargebacks are when they can come from the merchant bank, where the merchant bank basically, the player goes to their bank and they say, I'm not happy with it, and that comes back as a chargeback in the form of a retrieval. And chargebacks are almost impossible to contest or recover on digital media. There's no signed slips that you look for chargeback retrieval. So, but and I think that I can talk a lot about chargeback. I can do 20 minutes on chargebacks, and if anybody here is taking money from off a platform, so if you're using another payment provider, I can talk a lot about that, and so come up to me afterwards. Secondary markets, talked about briefly. Secondary markets, that's the career fraud. That's the true fraud thing that we all are afraid of, is people stealing stuff and selling it on eBay. Again, I find that's the least common fraud. Well, let's move on and talk about my definition of fraud. So this is my definition of fraud. Fraud is your failure to monetize an engaged player. That's the definition of fraud. We've looked at all these other types of things, but what you'll notice is that every person who commits fraud in your game is probably one of your most engaged players. They love your game. They're playing your game every day. They're looking for ways to exploit their game. They just don't want to pay for it, right? So if you can come up with a way to monetize those players, you'll convert them. So, and I got a couple of examples. The problem I have is automated play, where players will come up with, they'll get a macro recorder or scripting program, and they'll play the game automatically at low level so that they can earn and maximize their experience or the loyalty points they accumulate in the game. So, so I started talking to some of those players that we could identify doing that problem, and lots of them spent $40 on JitBit, right? It's a little macro program that does it. So they spent $40 to automate my game. I would have sold them the ability to automate the game for less than $40, right? But it didn't occur to me that that's what they wanted. We also have IP masking. So in our product in particular, we prevent you from looking at certain rewards in Las Vegas. If you're a Las Vegas local, they don't want to give you room nights in Las Vegas, so they minimize the catalog. But we have people that are spending money on VPNs and proxy servers and software like Photon, so that they can mask their IP address so that they can shop. And those programs cost $5 to $20. So why aren't I just selling them the ability to have an expanded catalog for that $5 to $20, right? It's just kind of nonsensical that we don't look at it that way, as these guys are spending money, they're just not spending money with you. So it's your fault that you have fraud. You built an engaging game that players love, so that's a cross you're going to have to bear. So let's talk about the typical response, and I'll try to be brief on this one. At every game company that's built a game that's engaging, you're going to deal with fraud, right? So typically, what you do is, we all come up with these ideas of automated detection and response systems where we look for patterns of behavior, and we tag that player, and then we respond to them either, and I think that it's interesting because the people I've talked to here, there's two ways you handle it. One, you handle it by banning the player. Oh, I'm just going to kick them off the system and never let them there. Or you ignore them. You actually turn off analytics for that player so that you don't measure them. They're still out there doing the same thing they're doing. You just don't include it in your metrics. So, and then for those of you who are using mechanisms other than our payment platforms other than the ones provided by the platform, you have velocity caps and limits to try to stop people from spending too much money. But the problem is that a bad fraudulent player at the beginning looks exactly like a whale, right? So by putting velocity caps and limits on those players, you're actually limiting the guys that you want to attract to your game to do it. So, I do want to say that it's your company, right? You may frustrate and alienate players by this response. Banning players gets in the forums, people talk about it. You may have an issue with the amount of data that's created from automated players, so you may think that's a bunch of garbage, you want to get rid of it. So that's the response. And I want to talk briefly about why that's bad. So The biggest problem is that all these tools you create doesn't prevent fraud, it hides the fraud, right? All you're doing is, so you've got a system that says, look, a player spins every 7 seconds, so if they're spinning frequently than every 7 seconds, then they're fraudulent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to block that player who spins every 5 seconds or every 4 seconds. Well, what he's going to do is he's not going to go away, oh, I got caught, I'm going to go do this to somebody else. He's going to change the frequency at which his automator spins. So now he's going to go to 7 seconds or 8 seconds. And you just hit the guy. You didn't actually get rid of the guy, you hit him. So, and it also reveals your detection process. So as soon as you find and ban a guy, or you've changed the behavior for him, then you lose. Then you've telegraphed what you do, and he's just going to change the behavior until he's not found anymore. So let's talk about I'm going to briefly talk about the benefits of fraud. I know that's kind of like the whole spiel, but I want to make sure I get to the end and you guys can answer some questions. Fraud players are incredibly engaged. They're spending. They're just not spending with you. They generate value, so they create engagement, they create virality, they love the games, they're more engaged than your average player, which means they get more open graph calls, they do more leveling, they do more game unlocks, they get more high scores, they send more gifts, they receive more gifts, they're engaged and viral. The next piece is that they create content, right? So a high-level player will actually generate content for other people, so leaderboards, they'll do, achievements. They compete in tournaments. They engage in chat. They provide competition in multiplayer games like poker and bingo, and they're also great quality assurance. So properly tagged, automated players are the best thing you can find because they're constantly. I have half a dozen players that I have tagged, and I've moved them over to a server that only they access, and they're just looking for exploits. They change their bet behavior. They change their the coupons and gifting, and they send crazy responses for bonus games. They're constantly probing our defenses, and that's bringing value to me. I would pay a service a lot of money a month just to provide that same exact progress. So, and they have no idea they're doing it, which is fantastic for me too. So here's the response that we use, and I have this mantra. The mantra is identify, isolate, minimize, and redirect. That's what we live by in our product. And what does that mean? So let's briefly talk about what that means. So in My Vegas, we have 6 steps that we go through. We detect fraud. Basically, we create all the processes that everybody else has. And all it does is look for the fraud that we have. The second thing we do is identify and tag players that are creating risk, and that may be that we just note their account so that customer service can see it, so that risk management can see it, so that the servers can distinguish between a player that we think is fraudulent or not. Then we isolate them. So. And we do this in a couple of different ways. We may isolate them by server, so that if they're creating a volume that's a problem, then they can go into a server that doesn't cause me a problem. I may actually remove features from them. So in my game in particular, I've only locked 2 players. We've had thousands of fraudulent players, but we've only locked 2 players out of the system. And what we do is if we detect that you're doing something that's fraudulent, duplicate accounts or automated play, we turn off your ability to buy rewards. You can still purchase, you can still send gifts, you can still be engaged, you can still send open graph calls to Facebook, but you can never redeem your loyalty points for real money. And what happens is by the time they get to the point where they've earned hundreds of thousands of loyalty points and they want to buy this, the room suite or whatever through the fraudulent means, we pop up an error message, they contact us, and then we explain to them that there's a problem with their account. But at no point during their lifespan with me did they realize that we detected them, right? We don't telegraph that. So they have to analyze everything they've done, maybe for the last 6 months, maybe for the last year, to determine when we detected them, and it makes the process really painful for them. And then we redirect them. So if you've detected somebody who's fraudulent and maybe you don't want to take their payment credentials, or maybe you don't want to let them redeem rewards, or maybe you don't want to let them have some features of your game, redirect them to things that bring you value. So we have fraudulent guys that maybe we'll send, but they have 500 or 600 friends. So we'll make the merchandising for social much more common. We'll get them to like our product. Liking our product, helps us, right? We get them to do other things that are valuable to us, even monetize if they're not a problem for that kind of fraud. And we just make that messaging a lot more prevalent. And then we learn. It's all about reviewing the top earners. The way that I do it is because I don't have a chance to look at all 250,000 players who log in a day. I look at the big changes. So if you have guys who gain experience at an incredible rate, or you have guys who earn loyalty at an incredible rate, or guys who unlock features at an incredible rate, then you look at the top 50 players, and that's going to teach you how the fraud works because fraud players by their nature are really greedy. So that's really the kind of the meat of it. And I wanted to leave a little time. I don't know how much time we have, but if we have any, a couple of minutes to talk about individual problems you guys may have. So questions? No? Yeah?
In the real money space, you have all these third-party fraud tools like GeoIP and you guys use any of those?
Absolutely. So GeoIP is a big deal for us, so we use MaxMind. But typically, whoever you're working with doesn't know your product as well as you do, and your challenges are going to be very unique to your product. So if you've architected your system in a way that eliminates the nasty fraud of client hacks, then really you're much better off just by focusing on tools that are good for you, because they're not as reactive. Your players are going to change. The fraud that I have 6 months ago is very different than the fraud I have now, and the fraud I had a year ago was different than then. So I recommend that you have somebody who's got a lot of ownership in the company, that's a product manager or somebody who really understands the product, to take this on in their free time, and you'll get more value than if you go with a third-party company. What do I think about what? It was really difficult. That was really hard. So whenever we first met with MGM, they have a very hard line opinion on what fraud is, and they really want to crush these people, right? And so we actually sat down with a huge slide deck and a ton of executives, and we talked through the process. And it took 2 long 2-hour meetings to really convince them that there was another way to look at this, right? The nice thing about it is that the liability we create is shared between 5 different reward partners. It's not just MGM. And so we had to explain to them, the true value of a loyalty point. We have like a 93% breakage on a loyalty point, right? So they had to understand that, this hundreds of millions of dollars of cost really isn't going to cost us hundreds of millions of dollars in risk. And then once they saw the effectiveness of redirecting and isolating these people, they realized that it made our jobs a lot easier. So it took a long time to get them convinced, but we managed to do it. Yeah, it really depends on the level of fraud. I don't believe that fraud's black and white. There's a whole gradient here. So players that we think that are really dangerous, we communicate to MGM, and they go back and forth. They'll let us know if we've got a player that's been locked out of their system as well. So we have a fairly good communication for a company with 60,000 employees, and so it's fairly good. But we do learn from each other, and I think they're recognizing they just don't know enough about this space to really exert a lot of pressure on us on how we do it. And I have really strong feelings.
When you move to gaming, how would you modify this approach?
Again, the key there is your relationship with your merchant bank, right? That's the thing that's going to be tricky when you go to real money, and I have this whole long discussion on chargebacks where if you're not pushing the limits on things like chargebacks, then you're not leveraging the system, right? For every basis point you shave off a chargeback, you're leaving a point or 2 of conversion on the table. You're leaving money on the table. So people that boast about their chargeback rates being low, that's a huge pet peeve of me. My chargeback rates are as high as my bank will handle without charging me fees, without fining me, or kicking me off. Because if I'm able to take away like fields, like maybe I don't need CCV, or maybe I don't need address, or maybe I don't need as much information, because every single box I take out of that process gives me 1 to 3 conversion points. So, so I think that again, it's about learning about where the fraud's going to be in real money. But this is something we learned in real money, and I think that it took a long time to come to this opinion, but it's really valid for real money. I think we're done.
Do you see these players that are committing fraud, like the serious guys? Are they hitting a lot of other games? Do you think that they're just like zeroing in on your game? And has anyone ever looked at like creating like a fraud database?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And we used to do it by the number one. So IP address, we don't have anything but IP address, right? Really, it's hard to really find these players. So used to in the real money space, we would tag yours, and we had 6 different ways to track you. Now it's a lot more difficult, but yeah, we find them, and we do map them out. My goal is to be we have an attractive product, but I'm gonna push all those guys to Game House now that they're giving out $100,000 a month. So it should be a lot better for us. All right, I think that's it. Thanks, guys.